Hi, this is Andrea. I am the mother to a beautiful autistic daughter, and I believe in a better future for her and all other neurodivergent young people. So I hope this is not your first time listening, but if it is, I'm also one of the many parent advocates for neurodiversity in Oxfordshire, UK. Being an advocate allows me to use my voice for my daughter, for other parents, for neurodivergent individuals themselves, and for professionals. Welcome to Season 2 of the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast. And today I have Richard Liverman with me. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Yep.
So Richard and I crossed paths in one of the workshops of the Autism Character Strengths research study that I'm pretty sure you've heard me talking about it. Hopefully you will have listened to the episode with JD Lai and Emma Jewett from the University of Oxford. And I landed in Richard's group at the time, and we were talking about ice cream, Richard, wasn't it?
It was one of the hottest days of the year, and I was facilitating the group. And it's always one of those ones when you work with people. Okay, how do you get people to open up and like feel relaxed? And it was so hot, and nobody was feeling relaxed. And I remember, I think the last time I was in Oxford, I found this amazing ice cream shop, and all I could think about was ice cream. So we did our favourite ice cream flavour, which I think has to be the ultimate. Instead of an icebreaker, an ice cream breaker.
And it worked perfectly. So this is also the first, the past few months have been like a first time for loads of things in my life. It's the first episode of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast recorded via Zoom. So thank you for making this happen accidentally, because Richard is not based in Oxford, so we can't be together personally today. However, we already have a plan to meet in person for another interview next year, so that's good. But first of all, Richard, how are you? Welcome to the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. How are you feeling?
Yeah, no, I'm very, very good. It's been a super busy and exciting week, and been looking forward to talking about a subject that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, and me too. Very excited to interview you. So let's start with you telling us a bit about your neurodiversity journey. How did you get here? Can you just give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, it was during COVID, my son unmasked, and it was a little bit of an explosion of having to learn new things, and it started becoming more and more pronounced during lockdown. Then there was this explosion, and it was, I don't really understand what's going on. And obviously, during lockdown, it wasn't easy to see anybody, and it was challenging. And when my son unmasked, when we got the diagnosis, it changed. It changed our lives. I think him unmasking changed our lives. When we got the diagnosis, it was almost a relief. And then I think from a personal perspective, I started questioning some of the things that had happened in my life. And then subsequently, I got myself diagnosed and found out that I was ADHD. And it's one of those things. From a personal perspective, I may have been diagnosed last year, I was diagnosed last year, but I suddenly realized I've had it my whole life. And I think it's because of my son unmasking, it opened my eyes to a world that I knew a tiny bit about, and it kind of altered our path as a family, and certainly both personally and professionally, changed the direction of travel for myself. And it has been, I'm going to sound like a contestant on X Factor or Britain's Got Talent. It's been a journey. And I think as a parent, you do have to go on that journey, but also as an individual, from my own personal perspective, it has been it's been very emotional. It's been very, very emotional. So my journey with autism, and, you know, I think to myself, I've had it all my life. I've only realized the last couple of years. And then, you know, it's the same with my son. When I look back and reflect, yes, he unmasked during lockdown, but actually when I think back, he's had it his whole life. So yeah, that's
it's
part of my journey.
It's part of him. Yes, and it's that enlightening moment. You know, some people would say you don't need a diagnosis as long as you are aware of or self-conscious about it. But with me and yourself, I think having the diagnosis made a huge difference.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I think it was, you know, it was very liberating. It was very, very liberating. And I think one of the things that it has done, both for my youngest son and the journey that I've been on, a mixture of understanding and forgiveness. And what I mean by that is I've had to understand him better, myself better, and the forgiveness is very much to myself. It's sort of
and
things
to be compassionate.
Which is
something we are not very much.
No, we're not. And I think it's always easier to be compassionate to other people than it is to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. Yeah. So this sounds, it sounds challenging, but it sounds positive, at least in the way you look at it now. However, as also a parent of an autistic girl, I know that there's lots of challenges that we have to face. So as a parent, what are the unique challenges and also the joys that you have been experiencing?
The joy, I mean, let's start with joy, because joy is rather wonderful. There have been a certain joy that I feel like, I hope that he feels understood. And I think that's really important for him. I think some of the joys are, in some ways, some things have been supersized. And there's nothing better than, you know, when you laugh. And there has been laughter here and there. We did a trip to a safari park, and this monkey jumped on our car, and just, we laughed as a family. We laughed so much, and I think we just appreciated the moment, and it was just fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. And I think there's some things that you might take for granted. We don't. And I think we are so much more present than we ever have been. And you notice things. And, you know, seeing some of my son's talents and strengths be absolutely supersized by what's happened.
It's that feeling.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful. And not that it's made me see the world differently, but it's made me appreciate things. And that's rather awesome. Yeah. So I think that the joy side of it is, you know, it's huge. I think the challenge is there is a type of autism called PDA, which is what my son has, which is pathological demand avoidance, which makes it very difficult to do certain things. And one of those things is to leave the house, for instance. So if we do, then we have to almost, right, we're going to play it cool. But inside your heart's like boom, 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 boom. And it's almost a challenge and a joy at the same time. You know, challenge is that, you know, we have to be carers as well as parents. And, you know, that puts pressure on time. And there are many, many challenges. And, you know, when it comes to eating and drinking, that is really, really difficult.
Yeah. But that also brings a lot of learning to the journey, right? Because
absolutely,
you kind of need to learn how to say no, for example, without saying no, or you kind of need to learn strategies to make them do certain things which are necessary for their well-being, like eating, like drinking, or even getting out of the house just to get fresh air without giving an order, right? Which is what we are used to. We grow up to do, right?
Yes, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges has been, I grew up in the 80s, and, it was a time where parents would tell you to do something and you did it. Mm-hmm. I've had to completely learn to parent in a different way. We live in a low demand house, and it is a totally different way of parenting. And I'm sure to parents of neurotypicals, they might look at what we do and just in gusts of horror, because it is so outside of how I was brought up, but it works. Not all the time, but it allows him the structure for the house to work. So the classic might be on Christmas Day, which is a really high demand day. And I think Christmas is, whilst it's a wonderful time, it's an incredibly stressful time for parents and children, potentially with PDA, and I'm sure with other types of autism as well. So there's no obligation to sit at the table with us. There's no obligation to, do those calls to family members. There's no obligation.
And that's okay too. That's part of what we are doing here, discussing a different family layout that works. Whatever works for you is fine, without judgment, without pressure.
Without judgment's really important. And I think one of the interesting things is how much judgment there is to the community. And I think that is something that, sometimes I struggle with. But then I think to myself, well, I have to do what's right for my son. So if he wants to eat pizza on Christmas Day, he's fine to eat pizza on Christmas Day. The fact that he's eating is awesome. Whether that's around the table with us or not, it's about what works. And I think sometimes for people that might not understand our community, it might look really odd from the outside, but you're absolutely right. It works for us.
Yeah. And it's said, I think when we met Richard, we had this conversation about having to let go of some people in our lives because there was no understanding, or there was always comments like, oh, but my son doesn't do this, or my daughter. They make you feel like if their children are better than yours, and that they are a better parent than you are. But again, it's not about competing. It's not about being better or being worse. It's about adapting and adjusting to the needs of our children.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that's one of the things that, I think has majorly changed for me, is my needs. I've always put my children's needs very, very highly. Yes. But actually, if it's a choice between my children's needs and judgment and expectations of society, well, I'm sorry, my children will always come higher. And I think there's something where, I think in the past, you may have seen a kid having a meltdown in a supermarket or shopping centre. And, I think in the UK, you can almost hear the tuts like, and then, did I do that? No. Was I judgmental? Possibly. But now if I'm in that situation, I see other parents sort of out and about, and my heart just goes to them because, you don't know other people's stories, yet we're very quick to judge. And I think, changing the mindset on that for me has been incredibly helpful for me personally. And I think maybe we should make tutting illegal.
We should, definitely. And the eyes, it's not just the touching, is the look in the eyes. And the feeling is horrible, and we both know that. But and thinking about this, it's not just about neurodivergence. We have other situations in society like homosexuality. Anything that is different from the norm is judged, and there's progress and mentalities are advancing, but in anything that's different, there's still a lot of work to do. So it's good to have voices like ours to continue talking about it. Just talking about it is enough, because it will hopefully expand horizons and open minds. I think that's what we need to have as a society.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
Now, going or focusing more on you and the ADHD, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can you share how your ADHD has influenced your career and your personal life, and and how these richer solutions came to an existence? Because I was a really bad introducer. I just started the episode and I didn't even say who you were exactly. I just said how we met. So Richard has his own business, which is called Richer Solutions, and it would be good to see how ADHD actually. I'm pretty sure it has a positive influence. So
yeah, I think it's interesting when you talk about how has it affected your career, and in some ways, my brain has this incredible ability to do big picture thinking and take things all over the place and bring it back together. And before we came on, you and I were chatting about house music. I mean, we're going off into all these rabbit holes, but they're rather beautiful ones. And I think that's one of the brilliant things that I have, is that I like talking to people. I like communicating. I'm very, very creative, and I kind of have this lust and zest for life. And it's worked really well from a business perspective. And 4 years ago, I set up my own business, and I do a mixture of branding, coaching, consultancy, and mentoring. I love it. I absolutely love what I do. And the bit I love is working with people and seeing people grow. And what's really interesting is, a lot of that is around helping small businesses. And one of the things that I've discovered is that there are many, many small businesses that are owned by neurodivergent people and neurodivergent groups or neurodiverse people. And it's been great, because I've sort of spoke to them and they feel understood. I'm able to, help put the scaffolding up so they can thrive. And I've absolutely loved it. And I'm looking at ways that I can do more around that, especially working with, those businesses owners in the community that do need help, but not necessarily in that traditional way of, right, let's do some smart objectives. They need something a little different. So it's allowed me to bring my passion for business, branding, and helping people together. And it's been this kind of wonderful adventure. And I feel really privileged that in my career, I've worked on some really big brands, and then I can sort of take that big thinking into sort of small businesses. And I absolutely love it. Love what I do. And I think from how has ADHD helped me back and pushed me forward? I think it helped me back when I was at the early stages of my career. I maybe struggled a little bit with organization and with certain elements of structure. And I think it was difficult, and I didn't understand why. Now I do. But then I think on the flip side of that, I was always able to do kind of the big picture stuff, the thinking, and be creative to solve problems. And people think that creativity is being able to draw or sing. But actually, Creativity is so much bigger than that. It's solving problems. Creativity is solving problems. And for me, that's how my creativity comes out. So having My own business has been incredible. I discovered that there's something called access to work, where the government will give you additional support. And that has made a huge difference. I have scaffolding to help me succeed. And that can be in the form of Grammarly to help me with my spelling and grammar. It is a support worker to help with the organization side of things. And then that way I can get in my zone of genius, which is helping people and being creative.
Yeah,
and my
that's
job's to
brilliant.
help other people get into their zone of genius. So you can kind of say, I love what I do.
Yeah, that's absolutely inspiring. And I'm listening to you, and again, we were talking about house music and how we have that in common, and I relate so much. I do not have my own business yet. That's something I'm thinking to have in a few years' time. But it's really inspiring to listen to you and to hear you. You have that thing that you don't. I think work doesn't feel like work for you. It's because you are doing what you love, and I think that's exactly. I'm doing what I love in every aspect of my professional life at the moment. Good. But it's your own project. You came up with it, and it's good to know about the government support. So can you tell me again? Is it access?
Yeah, it's called Access to Work. It's for
access to work. Okay.
It's for people in the workplace, whether they're in the workplace or whether they are business owners. And it's for disabled and people who are neurodiverse.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a program, you can Google it. It's called Access to Work. And there's a lot of paperwork to do, and you have to be assessed. And obviously there's a waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there to support us. And I think there's something, I talk about this all the time. What is the scaffolding to help you grow? And that is part of my scaffolding. I have other ones as well. But for me, sometimes people don't know about these things. And I think what's really important is we share this information so we can help each other. And again,
that's what I was going to say.
I'm in a networking group that's really, really fantastic. And one of the things that they talk about is a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think it's something that I think is really, really simple. And as a mindset, and I think this is what I really like about your podcast, is that it is a rising tide to lift all ships.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very kind. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. And we will add the links to when the episodes is uploaded, because it's important. I have the same feeling. There's so many things that accidentally I'm having a chat with another parent or with someone. Oh, I didn't know that. So it's really important because there's a lot more support out there than we think there is. So in terms of the organizations you work with or the small businesses, some of the leaders are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
How do you feel that, I don't really like the word inclusion, but how do you see a shift in thoughts trying to bring more neurodivergent people into the workplace in terms of hiring?
That's a really good question. I think some companies do it really well already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's companies like Google that are sort of very well known for this. I think there is a report at the moment that is being written called the Lilac Review. And this is something that, certainly from a business perspective, they're looking at disabled founders and the neurodiverse community. And they're looking to get input into this report that's going to the government to say, how can they improve inclusion? I think there is a long, long way to go. But when I see things like the Lilac Review and I see things like the work that Google are doing, it gives me hope. Mm-hmm. I still think there's a really, really long way to go. And I think, in some ways it's quite heartening to see what's happening. And in other ways, I think it's very frustrating that there's not more happening.
Because change takes time And sadly, we cannot expect that it happens from one day to another. Because I think the latest figures that I heard from the National Autistic Society, for example, is that only 1 in 4 autistic people are employed, which is not great.
It needs to change. And like I said, the Lilac Review is definitely pushing some really interesting opinions and thoughts on this. And I know that there is a lot of work going on in there. And if people want to contribute to it, again, I'll share the link for the podcast, because I think it's a really interesting thing. And where I think it becomes really important to us as parents as well is there's going to come a time where our children become adults.
Yes.
And how can we build a future for them that sets them up to be successful? So that's why I think this is a really important conversation to have.
Definitely. I totally agree. I often find myself thinking about my daughter's future and what's going to happen one day when I'm not here.
Same.
It's this feeling of, I don't want it to grow up. Or I do want it to grow up on the one hand, to see her developing, because we've been having lots of progress, slow progress, but it's progress. As we said earlier, every little step, every small thing matters and means the world to us. But then on the other hand is, okay, is she going to be able to be independent? So I really hope that when she gets to that time of going to work, that everything that we are doing together will have had an impact, and change will have happened by then.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
Good. I hope
So in terms of the systems which are in place at the moment, can you tell us some of the challenges you faced, for example, with the education system, which is when I asked my previous guests, how do you think your children are being failed the most? Everyone, normally, I think everyone said the education system is one of those that fails them.
Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Not really. I know there's some children who like podcasts, and they asked if they could listen to it.
I think that should answer my question. I think the education is a shower of whatever word you want to insert. We've had all kinds of challenges, and to the point where my son is outside of mainstream education. At the moment, he's not in school. He had an autistic breakdown and is recovering. The lack of understanding from our local school was appalling. The threat of fines, there were so many threats. And actually, when we were at our lowest point and needed support, it was absolutely the opposite. And I think for me, I want to take that, whilst that's an individual case for us, what's fascinating is there's so many other people that have had it worse than us. And one of the things that I find really appalling is that parents of autistic children are being fined by the government. And there was a time where it's still ongoing. My wife set up a petition against school fines for our community, and it's nearly at 300,000 signatures. It's been taken to Downing Street. It's going back to Downing Street. It's been discussed in the House of Lords, and actually had a meeting with the previous government. And at the time, the school's minister was a guy called Nick Gibb, and they just said that change the wording, and it was shunted around with the civil service, and it's still an ongoing fight. The new Education Secretary, Bridget Phillips, is been very, very harsh and pushing the whole school fines. How can you prosecute families of autistic children who are going through all kinds of personal stuff? And it's just disgraceful. It's absolutely disgraceful. And it has to change. And, we were curious to see what would happen when we moved to a new government. It's exactly the same. So the fight will continue, and there's incredible organizations out there that are leading the charge. There is an organization called Not Fine in School. Their Facebook group is growing and growing all the time. They offer incredible advice to parents around this topic. And there is another organization called Square Peg, who do incredible work to, be a voice of the community to really push for change. And if anybody gets the opportunity to follow Square Peg, they're not only is their heart in the right place, but they're working really hard to change things for our community, not just in fines, but in terms of inclusion and direction. And this is one of those things where organizations like that give me hope. And I think that's really important for our community. But I think the school system for our community is broken and it needs to be changed. Whether that will happen or not, time will tell. Definitely. And I didn't swear.
Good. Well done, you. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. Yeah, it's one of the things that, speaking with work colleagues, for example, and even me, it wasn't until last year that I realized that children were actually out of school or excluded from school. And it makes me really sad that it's most of the times because they are neurodivergent and the lack of support is not there. And we know that it's really expensive to fly somewhere during the half term, and we know that parents will do that because you need your holidays, you need your time away. That's fine. Yes, your child should be in school, but because some people do that for the benefit of having some time off, those who actually need to have the time off because their children are neurodivergent and they are struggling because they are not having the right support, they shouldn't have to pay for this. So I really appreciate
that's not a choice. It's a choice if you want to take your kids out of school and go to Centre Parks or fly off somewhere. That's a choice. When you have, and I'll never forget the day, it was just after lockdown, I was walking with my son to school. And it's one of those days that is one of the happiest and saddest days of my life at the same time. We were walking to school. We got to the end of the road. He held my hand, shaking. And he said to me, "Daddy, I can't do this. Can we go home?" And he looked me in the eyes. And he looked broken. So I walked home with him. And that was the last day he went to school. And that was maybe 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago. It wasn't a choice. We had to do it. And there are so many children that find the world difficult because of their autism. And are schools helping them or are they damaging them? And it depends on the child and it depends on the school. But at that moment, I had no choice. And I held his hand and we walked home and he felt safe. And I feel very emotional talking about this, but it was the right thing to do. It's the harder thing to do. And I think back to how I was parented, or that traditional parenting you would have dragged them to school. And we pushed him for the previous fortnight. But at that moment, I knew.
Yeah.
And it changed everything.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. So governments, please do something about this because this is not okay. And children should not have to have this feeling. School should be a happy place, a place where they are safe, they feel safe, they should want to go to. And it's clearly not happening. And I totally agree with you, Richard. It's best that he's at home because he's in his safe environment.
And I think the school system is very well designed for right, if you're really smart, you get this support. If you are struggling, you get this support here. And if you're in the middle, that's fine. If you're autistic, you're kind of floating in the sky.
Yeah.
Now, let's
fall within
say,
the
for
cracks.
instance, you talk about a typical classroom of 30 kids. You know, that kind of really smart, struggling and middle bit, that's what a school teacher is used to. If you've got an autistic kid up here, how can they give them the right support? They're not used to it. They've not got the training. They've not got the understanding. And some of them don't care. They're just a troublemaker, get them out. Well, actually, that kid's got so much potential. But because they don't fit into that system of that they understand, or how can they get great SAT results or great GCSE or whatever, they're kind of cast aside. So I think the education system, not just the school fine system, but the education system, certainly from a parent's perspective or from my perspective, is utterly broken. And I don't know how we change it for our community, other than by, like I said, great organizations like Square Peg, and we keep talking and battling. But one size does not fit all.
Nope.
And that's what I mean about the kind of being up here bit. They don't understand it. They haven't got the time to understand it. They don't want to understand it. And that's certainly been the experience I've had and other people in my community.
And I'm very sorry to hear that. It's unacceptable. And we shouldn't have to fight for this, because it's a legal right that children have to be in school, and not even to think about the curriculum that is completely outdated. I didn't go to school here, so I don't know much about it, but my brother did, my cousin did, so we have 10 and 17 years of difference. So I know little about it, but from conversations with previous guests, for example, who were teachers themselves and ended up leaving the education system because they could see not going well for neurodivergent children, and even for the neurotypical children. The curriculum seems not to work for everyone, because all of us are unique, regardless of you being neurotypical or being neurodivergent. We are all unique, so we will have our individual needs. And therefore, as you said, one size doesn't fit all, and change is needed. I have to say that we've been quite lucky with my daughter's school. They've been fantastic. Good. They just created an enhanced provision classroom for her and the other autistic children. And this morning she was shouting the name of the teacher because she's excited to go now and she loves it. And I'm so grateful that we are having this experience, Good. But so heartbroken at the same time to feel so many parents like you and your wife going through this really, I feel like swearing now, but I will not, really situation. So I'm very sorry to hear that you are going through that.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
So you gave us a few examples of groups that you are part of, but is there anything else that you do to advocate for change in the education system yourself, besides speaking about it and just being blunt about it, basically?
I think there's, like I said, the school fines petition has been something that my wife and a friend of hers have led. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes my job's to support her so that she can be that voice. You know, certainly from another perspective, I've joined a few groups and there's an app called Clubhouse, and I need to get in there a bit more frequently, but I've found a room of other PDA parents and PDA mm-hmm. Experts, and it's been this incredible community where, you know, we've been able to support each other, highs and lows. And I think sometimes, yes, you need to have those big voices that are going to go out there and change the world. But I also think sometimes if you can just listen or help and talk to one person, then that can make a difference. So that's certainly something that, you know, I've seen that I'm very proud to have contributed to. But also, I would have been lost without that group. Yeah, I met the world's first person that was diagnosed with PDA. There's been some other incredible people in there that have given me help and advice over the past 3 years. And I think there's a little bit where how can you pay it forward? So when there's new people into the community, you know, you can direct them or be just
Signpost them.
Yeah, not or just go, do you know what? What's happening to you is completely normal. You know, and sometimes people want advice, but sometimes people just want to be listened to.
Yeah. That's very true. And very important, because we all need to understand that we are not alone. We have our unique experiences and our unique journeys, but we are definitely not alone. And that's one of the most gratifying things that I'm finding in this role that I'm playing with the podcast and with all the things that I do with the community. So thank you for sharing, Richard. That was very sad and interesting to hear at the same time.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
So going back to your little one, how do you encourage him to celebrate his autism and PDA?
Do you know what it is? I think it's changing my expectations has allowed him to be himself. Not that he wasn't, but it's almost it's quite a funny story. Unbeknown to us, he'd entered a tournament on a game called Fortnite. And he qualified for it. And I think he finished sort of in the top 1,500. And we're like,
Amazing.
I'm sorry. The top, yeah. And he was like, we were like, oh my gosh. And we were so proud of him. And I think this is a little bit where, you know, it'd be great to turn around. I'm thinking the traditional way you might say, wow, he's got a really good school report, all A's, or he played cricket and hit a 50 or scored the winning goal. And in the past, he was in the little football team and had done really, really well. And we'd celebrated that in that kind of, you know, in that way before lockdown. But what we've actually realized is that we need to celebrate those successes in his world rather than what we think it should be. So when he told us that, we were like so excited for him. And it was genuine excitement. I mean, I tried playing against him. It was embarrassing. I was rubbish. Or I think he called me trash, which is not a good thing. But just when we did the strength-based exercise, what it made me realize is mine are different to his. So why would I judge him on what I think? So for me, I have this thing where I really appreciate beauty. I have gratitude, where he has kindness and determination, and they're kind of different strengths. And for me, kind of understanding his strengths allows me to celebrate it with him. And I think those traditional things that we view as successful, like I said, great school report, or you know, the winning hat trick in a football team, they're great things to celebrate. And we do that with my other son when he does well in those things. But I think there's that little bit where almost changing my thinking has allowed me to help celebrate with him what his strengths are.
You are right. It's about managing expectations. I think we all tend to have this ideal of children that we want them to be, but you know, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we just live day by day, you know, lower our expectations, and they will always have strengths. They might not be good in school, but they will be good at something else. And at the end of the day, school is just a bit of a foundation for life. But in school, you're not going to learn how to manage your finances, how to go to the supermarket and buy food, how to, you know, you're not going even to learn, hopefully this will change. You're not going to learn that there are other neurodivergent children around you. So it's life. You learn with life. Education is a constant in everything we do in life. It's not just school.
For me, it's not about lowering expectations, it's about changing them. And by what I mean by
Okay.
changing them is those almost traditional things that we see as good and bad. It has altered it. Like my son can touch type. He knows. Wow, and he's really good at it. And you know that seeing him play with some of his friends online, he's a leader when they do games together. He is, organized. He's got all of these skills. And I'm so impressed, but in the past I might not have noticed them because there was almost this traditional view of what success is or what good looks like. But when you actually really look, they're all there. They just manifest in different ways. And that's what I mean about changing expectations. It's like I still want my son to thrive and be successful, but that traditional route of school, exams, etc., you know what? That works for his brother. It doesn't work for him. And it's changing those expectations. And that has been a really good lesson for me. What works for one doesn't work for another.
Yeah, I agree. This is probably English not being my first language, but
No, it's fine.
It's not lowering, it's definitely changing. And I have another example with my daughter as well. She doesn't handwrite. Well, she does a little bit. She does some scribbles, but you give her a phone or an iPad and she can type anything because she knows how to write what she wants to watch. So again, it took some time for me to realize, okay, she doesn't hold a pen and write anything, but she writes in technology, which is fine. It's really about changing our perspective about, again, the typical ways of life, of how we were brought up with these norms.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
So what advice would you give to other parents? I think do you know what it is? Probably change expectations, but
change your expectations. Yeah. Change your expectation. And it all came from, there's a wonderful woman in the PDA community called Julia Daunt. And she was the first UK adult diagnosed with PDA. And she's taught me so much. And she turned around once and I said, I think my son's gaming too much. And she went, no, you're wrong. She was really matter of fact about it. And she was explaining how it's lower demand. And actually, you're the one that's wrong because that's your expectations, not theirs. And it was this light bulb moment. And I think there's that little bit where as parents, where we might have been educated, we might have grown up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or the early zeros, where we were parented in a way. Maybe it's time for us to do things a little differently and change our expectations rather than what our expectations should be of our children.
Yeah. And I think unconsciously we hold a kind of self-stigma.
Yeah.
Right? That if I'm letting him be playing games the whole day, I'm a really bad parent. That's not healthy for him. Same thing applies with my daughter and the phone. But no, it's exactly how you say. It's about shifting our perspective and overcome self-stigma, which is very, very important. What changes would you like to see in societies towards understanding and accepting neurodivergence?
This is a great question. And I think for me, when I was at school in the 1980s, if you felt a little bit uneasy eating bread or milk, you'd be told, eat the bread and milk. When you go into a restaurant, I went into a restaurant last night, and one of the first questions there is, do you have any intolerances? So gluten, dairy, anything like that. And it was this kind of almost, I was thinking about it last night on the train, and 30 years ago, it'd be like, no one cares. Or there wasn't that understanding when it came to lactose intolerance or wheat or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I almost think for us as a society, it's almost how can we get that understanding so that there's less tutting and more, how can we help you?
It's a very good comparison. I had never thought about it that way, but it makes total sense. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. And now let's talk a bit more about you. So I think we touched base on this, but what else defines you as an individual? So your tastes, your hobbies, and how do you take care of yourself and your well-being?
Yeah, there's a really lovely expression from mindfulness, which is you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others.
Very true.
I'm a work in progress on this. And one of the things that I do, I really believe in the concept of scaffolding. I have a coach, I have a mentor for myself, but certainly from a business perspective, that's very, very helpful. Every day I do a gratitude practice, and I've done that for well over 3 years. I now lead that practice, and we have a group of us that every day meet up online. Every day at 1 o'clock, we read a prompt that changes every day, and we give gratitude towards it. And what's wonderful is we have this amazing community. There's people in the UK, there's people in Japan, Canada, America, and every day for 15 minutes, we come together to do gratitude. And that, for me, is part of my scaffolding, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Christmas Day, New Year's Day. Yesterday, I left the meeting I was in to go and do it. It's part of my scaffolding that allows me to, find gratitude. And some days, I'm not going to lie, some days it's really hard because the prompt will try and get you to talk about something. And if you're having a hard day, it can be tough to find. But by doing it every day, it's now one of my strengths is gratitude. So I love that. I've got the community, the PDA community, which is really, really fantastic. I've got a little dog called Callie that I walk every day. Sun, rain, snow, like we are out the house. And then I also think for me, okay, what are those things where I can let my hair down? It's ironic. If you're listening, I have no hair. But how do I let my hair down? I love being in a crowd. So whether that's sort of going to watch a sports game, so I love Arsenal and Derby County, so I go and watch them. And every year I go to a rave in the O2, which is sort of Pete Tong with a full classical orchestra, where I just sort of, just for an hour and a half, I can be a raver and just really let myself, dance for an hour and a half. It's really, really wonderful.
I will definitely join in one of them.
You'd love it. I'm going this year in December, and I'm already sort of thinking, okay, what am I going to wear? I can have a bit of a laugh and a giggle. I'm really looking forward to that. And I think sometimes that's me putting my oxygen mask on. One of the other things I love doing is just going to Oxford. It's such a lovely city. I've had the privilege of going there a lot the last few years, and I just like wandering around. Just going to a restaurant in the covered market, or having a glass of whiskey in the Morse bar is just rather wonderful. So I think for me, it's how can I do those activities? And I'll always put other people before myself. So when I do those activities, the gratitude's daily, but those other activities that I need to do to support me, to allow me to support my family is really, really important. And I have to remind myself to do those things and push myself to do those things. And I'm very excited. I've already got a ticket for Oasis next year. And no, I'm not selling it.
I love it. I love the gratitude ritual. It's something that I actually heard about before, but it's really about prioritizing yourself. And I don't think I've been prioritizing myself, especially in the last few months. Although I think the podcast is actually me prioritizing myself, and it's my time. Yeah. So it works as a kind of therapy, you know, because I'm a people's person and I like to have nice conversations and all the mission that's behind it. So yeah, but I love all of that. I'll definitely look into the O2 Pitong classics and I might come and join you. And
You're very welcome.
Oxford sounds amazing. So next year when you're around more often, we definitely need to meet up, and I'm happy to do some sightseeing. Although I think you probably know more places than me, because I think that's quite typical, isn't it? When you live in a city, the tourists and the visitors know it better than yourself because you're working.
Do you know what's really fun? What's really fun? I had friends over from the States and they'd never been to Europe before. And there's something really fun about being a tourist in your own city. Like when you and I took them around London, and we had a day in Oxford as well. And I think there's something really wonderful about being a tourist in your own city because you see things differently. So maybe that's a little challenge for you.
Yep.
To be a tourist, not an inhabitant.
Yeah, definitely. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. I think I know the answer to this one. Who is your biggest support in your neurodivergent journey?
Well, this is, for me, it's about scaffolding, and there's more than one person. But the first person that comes to mind is my wife. She's rather brilliant. She has read so much. She has done so much research, and she is rather incredible in helping me be a better person, for sure. I've got some wonderful friends who have just listened, or have, taken me out for a meal when I've needed it. I've had a brilliant coach who's helped me on the ADHD side. Her name is Amanda Harmon, and she runs a business called Outside the Box that specializes in coaching ADHD people. She's super qualified, but also she's helped me mitigate the difficult bits and supersize the good bits. And I think she's fantastic and needs plaudits. And then there's also the bit about the community. The community has welcomed me in and has supported me, given me advice. We've laughed and cried and celebrated and supported. That's what a community should do. So I'm very grateful for that support journey. And, my own family, my father, my godparents, and, my oldest son, they are remarkable people that have allowed me to learn so much and to be better and stronger. So thank you to all of them.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Our support networks are definitely very important for us to keep going and for us to feel good with ourselves. So I'm glad you have like a big team.
I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, great. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. So if you were a superhero or you had a superpower, who or what would that be?
Now, this is one where I thought, okay, I've gone for one that, I've not seen any Marvel or DC films, but stick with me. It's the ability to find anything. And you see, I think this would be really useful because how many times have I lost my car keys or wallet? And then I thought about this for all of the ADHD people out there. That would be my super. Oh, Rich, I've lost my car keys. Oh, they're down the back of the sofa. So my superpower would be I can find anything.
I love it. I do love it. You just actually reminded me of my grandmother who passed away sadly in February. She used to have this ritual thing. Every time we would miss something, we knew it was in the house, like the remote or the phone or the car key. she would tie up like a cloth, just a normal tablecloth, to one of the legs of the table. And then she would have this prayer that I regret I never wrote it down. But the truth is that it worked. I don't know what it was about.
She sounds wonderful.
She was a wonderful person, and she's still one of my biggest inspirations. And yeah, we had a really strong connection. So yeah, I just found your power very similar. So I think my grandmother had that power with this ritual of hers.
We can do a superhero film.
Yes, we should, definitely. After you release your podcast, then we team up and we do a superhero movie.
And find stuff. Brilliant.
Yeah. And we will just overtake all of the Marvel and DC superheroes, because we will save the ADHD people for sure. In many occasions. That's sorry. And what are your hopes for the future besides us doing a superhero movie together?
Do you know what? It's really simple. I just want society to be kinder and more tolerant. And I think that, we need to find kindness and tolerance, because they're things that we should be teaching our children. They're things that we should be teaching society. So my hopes for the future are that the world becomes kinder and more tolerant.
And it is that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if your heart had a voice, what would it tell us?
Get me chocolate. Oh, no. I love my family. I need to love me.
Yep.
And get me some chocolate.
Yeah. Not ice cream anymore. Now we need chocolate, or hot chocolate, because the weather is just miserable. Richard, thank you so much. It has been a great pleasure to interview you, and thank you for supporting my projects. We'll certainly be in touch. I look forward to catch up with you in the future, and yeah, have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.
And there was Richard Liverman. I hope you find Richard as inspiring as I do. It's so heartbreaking to hear all the challenges that Richard and his family have experienced with the education system. Just another real story that proves the urgent need for change. At the same time, it fills my heart to hear Richard talking proudly about his son and how by changing expectations, he is allowed to be his true self. Let's let our children be their authentic selves. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast. The next episode will be out on Saturday, 30th of November, with my guest, Alex Richardson. Alex is 22, autistic, and very passionate about being autistic. He is an ambassador of the National Autistic Society, and he shared his journey growing up in a world that can be cruel. His story is so moving to the point of leaving me emotional while interviewing him. And you cannot miss it. Tune in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Until then, have a great couple of weeks. Bye!